So we've let the stream sit open for a bit, so we'll probably get started here. It's almost 6. Today's just going to be a little laid back today. For this stream, it's not going to be too heavy in terms of code, even though it does say making multiplayer. So we'll be making the game multiplayer today, and then we'll be looking at doing some fun stuff with that. Um, Remember, if you find this helpful, you can always watch live demos you can on Twitch and look at the old catalog by going to youtube.com, which is where if you view my different playlists, there will actually be a whole tutorial series on this project that we're working on today. We'll be looking at just changing over some of our stuff to be more multiplayer friendly. And by multiplayer, I mean local multiplayer. I don't think that I'm going to be putting this into um, an online multiplayer, especially for the first release. If that's a topic that people would like to see, make sure to comment and share the channel so that we can get a bigger audience to do that with, as well as we'll probably have to pull testing out of there at some point too, so it's not just one person in the multiplayer room, which doesn't prove anything, least of all that it works. With that, I'm gonna go back over to this tab, and we're just gonna turn the music off because this is a game development stream, and I can't listen and do that in the same time. Which I suppose I could just turn the volume off, but either way, let's go ahead and turn that. There we go. So this should be pretty good, and then we'll flip over to here. Got our full screen. Don't worry about that error just yet. And then I'm going to flip back. It's a lot of flipping back and forth for me on these scenes, but it does look a little bit nicer. So let's go. First of all, if you open your projects and you go to assets, scenes, I believe we had sample scene, which is where we were still storing all of our stuff. Let's go ahead and save. So this here, look at this guy here. So he is in the scene technically, and we never prefabbed him. So it should look yours should look like this, unless nope, I don't do that at all. There. But to make this guy a prefab, if he is not blue for you, if you haven't done that yet, go ahead and drag him from there just over to the prefabs folder so that so I'm gonna rename this _2 so you guys can see that it does in fact happen and doesn't give me duplicate errors. So we pull that in and we put in prefabs. I had one in there, so I hit original. I don't really save as I never really do anything that makes it a dependent prefab. I always do original prefab. Because I tend to work in stages, each prefab is usually a stage. With exception to this was kind of like an update where I was working alongside to make one thing. And I'll show you guys that the bike scene, which I was working in to test some of this stuff out in a little bit, but we'll start with that right now. Let me just double check my application. Application looks fine. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and go on to this one, and I'm looking at, so I don't need this prefab because I have this prefab, so just delete that. I just did that for demonstration's sake. So if you have this, then we're going to go to assets, scenes, and tests, and you'll want to create a new, what is it, new scene. I'm just going to leave it new scene. I could rename this MP. If anyone wants to know that shortcut, it is F2. So select F2, get your rename. And that's pretty simple there. So then we open demo, got main camera, don't want that. Directional light, also don't want that. It probably resets some of the other stuff. Lighting, environment, 0.8. Okay. And you'll notice we're not going to drag in our prefab right away. What we're actually going to do is create a new empty game object. Inspector. This is going to be MP manager. And this is going to be our multiplayer manager. Just remember to either make it like camel case will separate most of the time, but in the hierarchy, I just like to see this underscore so it gives me a space because I don't like leaving spaces in these names. Again, just another one of those personal preferences, but we can go select MP manager and we go to the input field. So you'll remember we added a player input object, right, to that racer. What we're actually going to do is add a input manager. And basically this is going to run our adding of players and loss of players, similar to what a network manager would do if we were doing Unity game object, netcode for game objects. Which we probably won't be doing on this tutorial unless we get a lot of people to ask for it. So if that's something that interests you, let me know in probably my YouTube comments section would be the best one. Or drop in on a live demo and list it in chat. So we got player prefs, or not player prefs, player prefab. So we just want to add that prefab we made. Assets, prefabs, and we're going to throw our bot player in there. And he should be set up because basically what this is doing is it's assigning like a device to our input that's found on this object. So let's open this. We can use our top layer container because it has an object that has an input, player input, and it'll just find that object and that input. There's one thing we need to remember to do in here, and that is the camera. So in order for split screen to work, it needs to be able to place and change how that camera behaves. So we need to go into our cam, our racer cam, and just pull that over and assign it there. So it knows that's the camera we pull on for split screening. Pretty simple. I had one other fix I had to do, but it shouldn't affect it because that's not in your guys' code if you've been following along. So essentially now we go back to the scene. So we have MP manager, which has that bot player. So I'll save up and I'll play. And it should start. There's nothing displaying. And we do space. And what? Where? Oh, because I created a scene and didn't add a plane or anything to it. So let's go ahead and just create. Maybe I'll do this. Yeah, create empty. Create 3D object. Plane. I'm just going to do a 10 by 10. And we're gonna go 0, 0, 0. So now if we do play, it should land on something. Okay, and you see it spawned. Is there a console issue? Did I screw something up? Nope. It's oh, it has to do with I never put an artificial gravity on it, which is if I just open this, rigid body, actually it wouldn't go on player bod, would it? Well, for this guy it wouldn't matter because he doesn't turn like my other bike does. So let's just add racer false gravity, rigid body. I drop the click and just set it for 25. It's actually like something like 9.8. You guys don't have this tool, but you also didn't disable the gravity, hopefully. So if you did, go to project settings and put a gravity value in here, -1 preferably, otherwise you're going up. And that'll fix your guys' problem, but it's more just a problem for me because of what I was working on. So then we're going to do a play. And if we do space, then do H. Doesn't seem to be doing anything, does it? Huh. I have a feeling I changed something to do 0 speed. So we'll double check that quickly. The scripts, SEO parameters, SEO params, move params, color palette, cam params, move params, accelerate. Accelerate is right. Has force. Not sure what that. Maybe I should have just done this in sample scene, drag it out, because that scene existed with the correct settings. Because my plane doesn't have a is road. So I think I changed this off camera, but I just added some things and then added it to the SEO. So if you're wondering about that, go ahead and check out that video. That was like it might have been 2 or 3, but it's on like 2 or 3 videos, but it's on ground collision and checking if we hit the ground, that sort of thing. And I just added more of the layers that were also ground, so that it could go over them, but we could adjust based on the layer later what their traction and stuff is. Which I'll probably go over later. I might open that object if there's time to look at it. But essentially, I'm changing this to isRoad. So then we go play, which I think you guys probably have is. Yep, there it is. And he turns. Still good. So that's all good. So everything should be working perfectly that way, right? So the second thing you'll have to do in order to get this multiplayer is, so this MP manager, join players when button is pressed. You can go ahead and use that. The thing that's different about this is if we go back to our prefab, which is why it's also important, this is prefab, because if we open our prefab and we look at our input setting, where is that at? Player input, events, RacerCon. There is one. There's like a join. I think it was like join on button press or something. I found it one time, but I can't find it again. Anyway, it's set up by default pretty stable and reliably. Don't worry too much about it. You shouldn't have to adjust it unless you have somebody else's project, which is not set up that way for some reason. Anyway, player input. We're going to go ahead and actually change our input, which seems to have closed. So if we remember, that's an assets in top-down racer. No, that's the asset we're using. Racer input. Okay, I have it over by here, not over here, which is where I thought it was. Because that's where I have it on the other system. Space keyboard. So basically, I added these. So what you can do so that it's really easy is basically controller's going to need to get buttons, right? So that when you press A, it joins your controller. That only really works if there's controller inputs in the input system. Otherwise, it's like, well, there's no gamepads for this move controls input, so why do I care what a gamepad's doing? So you do need to add key bindings for that, and the easiest way to is just to go the move vector 2, and I think Control D, and it'll duplicate that. I don't know why it named it V3. That is stupid. But it must have been a numerical idea. And then you can drag this around too. So you could drag this down to here, set down to here. And then you can expand this and change your key bindings simply by going binding, go path, and gamepad. I use gamepad, and actually what I did use is not that. What is the 1 second while the controller turns on? And I need to go get a light for this part. And there we go. So the light's on. If we do this part, okay. Huh, it's not, okay, 1 second hold. We're gonna have to just hold for a minute because Unity decided it doesn't want to connect to my controller. I think it's the PC that doesn't want to do it, because otherwise I'd have a thing that can do it. But but I should just have to go down Guion tablet, Corsair. I think what I'm actually gonna have to do, I don't think I've added it to this computer before. So we'll see if this is, we'll try this live pair and see how this goes. Be really disappointing if it doesn't connect, because I don't have another way to show how well that works on this computer. That's exciting. And it's not finding it. If I do this button, how does this work? There we go. There we go. And we can go back to art too. Okay. So this should work now. If not, so open the gamepad because that's what I want to use. Actually, I use this arrow button after I've selected gamepad because for some reason this is how they decided to implement listen. So if we click here, what? Come on. Okay, there it is. And what is this? Up. And I did left stick gamepad works fine. But you could do any of these because they're all technically the same input. I just wouldn't worry about it too much. I'd stay with left stick up gamepad because if anything, one of these two will also apply to the DualShock controller or like some of the cheaper controllers that aren't necessarily Xbox controllers. So I would do gamepads. Might give you a better chance of working across more devices. But you could definitely do it Xbox and gamepad. But I did all mine in gamepad. So you can do that for your different inputs. You can map vector all the new vector to controller config that you duplicated very easily. That's down, so I'll do, is it find? Is it, what's listen? There it is. I don't understand. I don't think it's displaying correctly, and I'm sure they might have fixed it in 6. 6's UI is a lot better, but, you know, I don't know. So you map that, right? And as long as there's controller mappings in here, it'll look and it'll be like, okay, so this button press would add it as a joined controller. Cool, right? So I'm going to delete this because I already did this in here, and I also mapped start racer so that you guys can see it start. So I'm actually going to remove this little guy, move controller, and all I have to do with that is, well, okay, I'll click on something else. Then I'll click on it again. I think I can hit delete, and yeah, it deletes it. So much easier. So I just mapped these two, controller move, the 2D vector like I said, and then start racer on the left button, which is like X on an Xbox controller. And I have those mapped. Then I went into my player container. So if you need to pull that open again, that's prefabs, bot player, and I'll siphon that back. So let's look at it being, because that'd be on player bod, correct? And then flip over to inspector. And we go down to the bottom, right? Or not bottom, but into racer input. So the player input, and then we just go events, whoops, events, racer controls. And then those new things that we made, we have to assign controls to them. So just controller move and controller start race is what I named them. So we pull in our player body and select, if you remember, racer input bridge. And this one was move input for controller move. And as you can see here, I did the same for racer input bridge, racer start, which is the method that connects for racer start to start the racer currently for testing. Okay, so if we have all this hooked up, there's one more thing I did in the UI. So in the UI, I changed the way the canvas works. So this canvas is no longer a screen space canvas. This is a screen space camera canvas. So it scales to the camera that it's assigned to. This guy currently doesn't have a camera, so in our prefab, we're gonna go and grab that racer camera and give him that thing to hold on to. And then that's all good, right? Should be. So then, once we have all of that, the camera's connected to the input, camera's connected to the UI, UI is feeding as camera overlay. We should be all good, right? So here's the spacebar. Here's the A button. Here's the square button. Oh no. And why did this work this way? I think I know why. It's in our scene. I think I forgot to check some stuff. Joining by default is allowing people to join. Limit the number of players. I'm not going to limit them right now. This is just for testing anyway. We got one controller and one keyboard. How many can we add? But we need to enable split screen. And we can either maintain aspect ratio or set fixed number, select rectangle. This is kind of deceiving. This refers to how much of the screen. So the width is one width of the screen, and height is one width of the screen. If you're familiar with viewports for camera in Unity, this is essentially what it is for the whole split screen object. It is not per camera. So adjusting this will make it like half the screen that the split screens take up, not what you want, which is for the screen to take up half viewport or whatever. So if we go ahead and do that, now it's allowed to split screen. So let's go ahead and do space and X. And it looks like my UI doesn't quite scale correctly. That might be something else that I changed on the other prefab. Let's not worry about that too much. Let's go square. Can we see our other? There's the guy. But as you can see, that's set, and then if I do H, so we should eventually see each other. You can see two inputs running at the same time, two different cameras, all split up. We could fix that UI. It's probably just as simple as going to this UI and saying match. We want to scale with screen size. We want to match width. This is exactly the same setup as my other one, so I don't know what's different. Yeah, not sure what's different there. But essentially everything's working. Oops. And it is getting a little hard for me to do this without yeah, just because this tablet's really small that I'm working on, and I wish I had bigger screen like 2K monitor to adjust. But it is the way it is. So this UI, space pixel perfect, sorting layer default, order and layer. Oh, there's a distance, plane distance. Don't want that. One's good enough, should be. Um, yeah, it sits a bit more in world space, so that would be like 100 units away, which doesn't work. And now you see the UI works correctly. Yay! But yeah, so this asset makes multiplayer really simple. You can see that Eraser's working with the controller already with that input, even though all we did was add some actions and add some mapping. But that's the whole point of the bridge, is that we don't have to remap what the buttons connect to, because they just call the same methods, because they all throw pass through vector 2 for move. They all throw a button type for the other one. Um, so it makes it really easy for us to switch between that. I'm using the controller, by the way, on the right. That's why we're moving around, and it's just working pretty nice, and we don't have to worry about that because we use the input bridge to have those classes, and or those methods. And our input action map, we can just keep mapping to that same method because we're sending it the same information, which is like the vector2 and some of the other info. So even though I didn't notice it, everything is absolutely set up to work for split screen multiplayer really easily. The one thing I couldn't do that I'm a little upset about is that it doesn't allow me to, say, take the top half of the screen. It only allows me to split side by side because it's just automated to do that, which is a little irritating. And not gonna lie, I don't like that. I would much rather prefer it be at least have an option to have top and bottom fill first, because in Eraser you want to be able to look left and right more than you want up and down. If this was a shooter, this would be perfectly fine. It wouldn't be that big a deal. If it was like an adventure game, like a co-op Zelda or something, it'd be perfectly fine. Uh, or Pokemon or whatever, any of those other types of game modes and stuff, that would be fine. The verticals, like yeah, the vertical slice. Um, but in Eraser, even some shooters, I would prefer to have a horizontal slice and not have that be the only thing I can do. Um, somebody claimed it was fixed in 6, Unity 6. I installed 6 and it did not work. Or it did not change to have that as a feature. So the only other thing you can do is which I won't do tonight because that's timing finicky. And by timing finicky, I mean I need to do it on a player join, but also make it happen after the multiplayer manager assigns viewports, um, so that I can do that. Which makes it a little more difficult. Um, I don't necessarily want it to be all troubleshooting that sort of thing on stream tonight. So we're not gonna do that because I don't know enough to do that right offhand right now. What I will show you is or it's gonna be more of a topic, I guess. So in this kind of game, I would almost swap the colors, being swapping materials, more than I would swap. Well, I am going to need to swap materials actually, so I could code swapping materials tonight, um, and just add it on as a thing. So, but essentially, it is um, we think multiplayer, and we're like, okay, so as long as we get 2 players in there, it's fine, right? Basically, it is, but if you wanted to do customization, we'll just do a quick talk about that topic, kinda. So essentially, uh, we play, and both of these guys are going to be one prefab, right? So if we wanted them to be different colors, how would we go about doing that? Well, I would probably map it to like what their player number is, and I don't know how to do that from multiplayer because it just adds player count, and I'm not sure how they're indexed when they're adjusting screens. Um, is it going? There we go. Because there's this line, right? Imaginary. But what does that really do? Uh, I guess what I mean to say is I'm not sure how to reference it through the let's go MP manager. I'm not sure how to reference what our total players are. Um, I could probably Google that real quickly. So let's try and do that real quick. Unity player input GER Unity input manager. Player number. Because it indexes them somehow, right? So how do we get their indexes? Google doesn't think it needs to answer. The input manager component. We'll just use that one. How's this one still up? It's looking fine. Okay. So notification, join behavior, player prefab. Joining enabled by default. Limit number of players. Max player, limit 2 players. Enable split screen. Join players when button is pressed. So these are all the things I'm looking at when I'm looking at it. I'm just reading them off. Screen rectangle, the normalized screen rectangle available for allocating players split screens. Player join message and player left message. So as you can see, we can't or as you can hear rather, not really anything for getting what the player ID is, which is kind of a pain. All we can really do is get joined messages. So we'd probably have to create something that keeps track of it, some sort of manager for the players, or at least keeping track of the players. So we have to keep track of players and then hold like our own indexing and apply our changes. Um, and with this game, we could just get away with doing like pulling their saved customization settings and applying like a skin color because there's not really much else to this guy. Um, it's just this one. Like we could even skip changing the wheel paint, and we could just change this material here. But and that would be all that it really affects. We could even do a really simple one if we wanted to pick one color and just go and just give it a tint and change its tints. We wanted to stay with one color and just do the whole thing, which would be pretty easy. I'm actually building a color picking tool, so it keeps track of your swatches and your um, swatches and palette for different things. I've seen one on the asset store that helps with color picking and palettes and stuff, but I didn't see it where it could be applied it through code, so I still went ahead and finished the one I was making. If we're gonna do that route, let's go ahead and start thinking of some stuff. So we need, first of all, let's see, player input. It's on input, right? So we got to go to input and look at that. Input, events, device lost, device is empty, list device, or list is empty, device regained, device lost. So this would be if the input does something when these things are sent to it. Let's go back to our scene and look at that. Manager, let's go 0, 0. Just zero things out and put this at a -2 for my comfort. So what does this do then? This manager, what can we get from this manager? So we have join players when button is pressed. Okay. Limit number of players joining, enable split screen, maintain aspect ratio. So we can't really, there we go, send messages. So like before, we can tell it to invoke Unity events. And what are the events? So on player joined, we can set that certain things happen when player is joined, which is where we would do our color changing and our custom viewports. So let's go ahead and think how we can possibly do that sort of thing. First thing that comes to mind is I would make a manager. So what kind of manager class do we want? We'd probably want a singleton, right? If you've watched the singleton videos, you'll know there's like 3 different ones that I use. To use the Unity events in here, I think I'd pretty much have to use one of the mono behavior ones. And I'd probably want it to be, I have to think what I want it to be in one scene or multiple scenes. So if I'm doing one scene, that's gonna be in this scene, run once, and be done. But I'm gonna want to bring in my changes, so I'm gonna want to keep my management because it's going to be management from race to race to race. So I'm gonna want basically my game manager to go through, right? So we could actually start on our game manager script that we made long ago and never touched. So, game manager. Okay, so game mode was another one. So what was game manager commented for? Racer input bridge. None of these were really commented to do anything. We just went over the singleton types. Not the best use for me right now. Does game mode have anything commented in it? This one for some reason doesn't have any. So racer settings is a, what is it? It's a scriptable object. Not sure why it's in here. in this folder, it would probably be in a different one. I must have just needed a place to put this without making a bunch of folders at the time. Methods, accessors, player ID. So this is just a scriptable object that holds the reference data for the different things. I won't be using this anymore. Not for that reason anyway, because to put it in a scriptable object, I save it out to it. Or I guess this is racer settings. No, this is racer setting. I'd have to map everybody to their own scriptable object, which would defeat the purpose because now it's kind of in a prefab. So I'd have to have an object to map these scriptable objects just to the racers, and that doesn't. That doesn't make a lot of sense. I suppose it could. Player ID, render mode. So these are basically ones I was going to show on how to use the render textures and do that. So I'll show that not today. I'll probably go through and make sure I haven't referenced them, at least in a title or something of some other video. So I'm not backtracking too much. Basically, I think we're going to go game manager. I think that's what because game manager, if we're thinking about broad strokes, we're looking at, we come in, games, like application start, not game start. Game manager, we have our racer input bridges. We don't necessarily want to get them. We don't necessarily need the racer settings. Racer manager, race manager. Race manager only does the one race round, so we really don't want to do that. Let's just do something really simple like player manager maybe. Create a new one, pull the singleton code from one of these other ones that we have. Create C# script. Player management. AGER. I'm gonna go player manager script. Wait for him to save, process, open, and go there, and we're going to give this into the namespace. Again, nobody has to use namespaces, but they're going to help me when I go to divvy up my code later, so I'm going to make sure these are in here. Bug-free productions dot arcade racer. I am actually going to get this all deleted. And you'll see the normal returning bars. Methods. And then we're actually going to go game manager because this guy has to be persistent across classes. So this is going to be do not destroy on load attempts and objects. So if we look at this, we have game manager GM get if instance equal null game object new game object. So this creates the new thing with this class on top of it, correct? Right. So player manager, we want that do not destroy, right? Do not destroy on load. We also want a little bit of the race manager where we have singleton race manager being that it just looks for itself, and if it finds it, it destroys it. So what I would probably do here, because I'll probably put it in the scene and then have a different thing that reaches back to it. And I'll want this to not be destroyed on load, but I'll also want it to be placed by me, if that makes sense. So I want to place it in the scene, not to generate a new one, because I might need to prefab it, which would not work if I did the other thing. So if we're looking at it like that, then I need to go, not serialized field, this is going to be pro, and so I'm not going to do the static part because I'm not spawning it, so I don't need to keep that reference. So let's go ahead and go like a protected, no. Well, I could do static because it'll just be destroyed and it'll be a null reference if that object isn't there, right? So I can do static player manager instance, and looks like the AI is finally learning how I write, which is worrisome and I don't like it at all. But game manager. I don't want to do this. I want race manager to do. I want the one like the race manager, racer camera manager. No, race manager. Single race. So single player manager. I can't spell and I'm not going to pretend I can. There's a lot that's going to be spelled wrong in these tutorials and well. So race single player manager RPMS. So this is going to be if right, and this doesn't work. Yeah, I remember that doesn't work because we're going to put a non-static reference back to a static reference, which isn't great. So we shouldn't do that. We want a RMS. There was a huge mess when I did some networking stuff with static references, in which case I'd have to have a non-static reference that referenced a static reference, which it could so that it could cycle back. It was a whole pain in the butt. It was not fun. We're just gonna go ahead and so if you don't have to use static variables, I wouldn't worry. I wouldn't try and use that. Go out of your way to use them. Um, they just make things a lot more confusing for some things. Other things are really useful. There's certain things they're really useful for, just like constants. But doing too much in static can be really can really bog you down. Protected on enable. I want this to be virtual for my preference. Single player manager, so we're just doing this. So if the length is greater than 1, we destroy the object. Else, we don't destroy on load the game object. Which is cool. The fun part about that is the destroys and the don't destroys won't be resolved in a manner that reflects at the same time. It does one and then the other, so they do still evaluate separately, which is good. Because if they both executed at the exact same time, they wouldn't. They just destroy each other, and there'd be no objects in the scene. So that's a good thing. Bars. Is there anything in variables that we want for player manager? So player manager, we'd probably want something like, since we're not doing networked, we can do a dictionary. Well, either way, we'd probably want to do a dictionary. It's just we won't have to deal with the other problems that come from using dictionary. So let's do a protected dictionary. Dictionary. And what's the key value? So the key is going to be a player. I don't know what kind of thing we'd want to access just yet. So let's not. Let's go ahead and do. Okay. Let's do an integer for sure. An integer, lowercase. And what would I want? So this is probably going to be a class that I make, being that I need to communicate some way, and I'll have to go and get that reference. If we think of Unity in the way that I want the input manager and the events, so I can't add a reference to a non-mono behavior class, right? If I did C# events, that just didn't help me at all. So we invoke Unity events. So it's going to have to be a mono behavior. And the only way I'm going to get that is if I have a mono behavior that's just listening for this. And player joined. It looks like it tells me that a player joined, but that it doesn't tell me who the player is, and what object that player is. So I can't even get like the top level container object that we put it in, which sucks. What would the next thing be? We'd still want to try, so we need something to that's not only here to get the messages, but also that adds it to it. So I want I'll probably do that in here. So if I go to my, I'm going to create another empty object for right now. And let's think about this as, we'll just call it the player manager. Player manager. Okay. What I'm assuming this event is going to be like an event delegate. We'll test how accurate that is. So on joined player input, because then we can basically add things in here, right? So I want to do, so I want player manager. I want to go to player input. Say, let's go player manager. Player manager. It might be kind of dangerous to label all these things so close together. What's the, must be preceded by a member. Oh, we're still working on this. So we have a player manager, but I still want to name it a player manager. Yeah, we'll leave it player manager, and we'll want a dictionary of type or whatever we're going to be players. Let's leave that int right now, just so we can. Let's just finish up this dictionary declaration. Change me later to reflect player reference player, yeah, player references. Change me later to reflect player references. Cool, right? And then this is going to be PLAYERS players is equal new dictionary of intent, just so I don't have to deal with that right now, and I can work on my other methods, because make a singleton, and then here we're going to have add get an add delegate to input manager. And actually, what this is going to end up being, unfortunately, is that we have to grab like this. We probably don't need this separate object, because this guy is actually going to have to be, along with all of our players, move with us from scene to scene until the point where a new multiplayer manager would be, and he would destroy this one in order to clear out the reference so that a new game can start, because he's going to go with us for not just one race, but possibly 5, and then we complete the circle and we destroy that one, link back up, and keep going, which is the idea of the flow we want. Where this one, if he keeps going, we still have to respawn all those players and get all those infos back. Not great. So I'll probably delete this actually and add a component that is a player manager. He'll be on there. So let's go back to this guy. And I'm sorry if this is not very straightforward, but I don't have a great deal of prep time either. Dictionary players. So we need player objects, but let's focus on this right now. So if they're on the same object and this guy's doing the single racer player, and actually with the logic, if we destroy when we find one existent in the scene, this is backwards. So if it's greater than one, we're not going to destroy. So if we do not destroy, so we always do not destroy unload in this scenario, correct? So let's go. Then Alt Tab. Nope. Crap. Is it Shift Tab? Yep. Shift Tab. Do not destroy unload. Because we always do that. Then we need to find which one is not this game object. So we could. So let's do that. Let's change how this works a little bit. Because we want to destroy the objects in this array, right? But except for ourselves. And I think we can use link across forms. It's just the file structure is different, so we can't path too much. Yeah, that was the issue. It's not using link, it's using the paths, because pathing on Android is different than that. So also probably on Mac and Linux too. Well, probably not Linux or Mac. Those should be pretty close to the same. But essentially, I'm going to go ahead and use link, I think. Is it system.link? System.link. And the reason I'm going to use link here is for one simple reason. List of type PLAY type of player managers PMS. Let's actually delete this. Control X. Equals this dot to list. There's just some cool extensions for arrays and link, this being one of them. So find object of type player manager returns an array of the found objects, and then to list makes it a list. Well, why do we convert it to a list? Because now we can just use remove. Unlike in an array where we'd have to like redeclare everything, or not redeclare, reassign everything. This way we can just go player managements, player managers, um, dot remove um, this, and that should remove this object from the list, which is great. Um, and then we can use a for each loop. And for each player manager p in PMS destroy, and not the player manager, it'd be p dot game object because we want all of it. And we do not destroy unload. So that works pretty good at serving what we want because we want to drag it in the scene, entwine it with, and it's a prefab that's going to be entwined with the multiplayer manager. And then once we find a new object that is the same as it, we just destroy it and let that one take over. All good, right? Yeah. So there's that one. A complicated thing to think of on the fly. Anyway, we can jump over to Unity. And I'll probably just pull up my thing. What is it? Up, but up, but up, up. Just a reminder, so if you're either enjoying this or finding it useful, please remember to watch the live demos at the Twitch, schedules up on the Twitch, and then or subscribe and follow the YouTube, where they usually get posted like 5 days after or so. I'm gonna get a drink of water. And then we'll continue in a second. Okay, so let's look at this with. So what we have here now is we have a player manager, which is that's player input manager. Oh, I added another input manager. Just remove that component. Add player manager. Um, right now it doesn't have anything, and it kind of needs a method because we just want to make it so that this event can be triggered. So we need an event. So player input manager. Let me check. Input action. It's not going to be like the input action. Let's see what I can add right now. Hmm. Events. Yeah, I'm just not sure how this actually works. Player manager, so all of this, and then there's static parameters. Send message, all of this stuff. So let's see if we can, yeah, this might not be the smoothest going thing. Let's go ahead and plot back to Art2. So let's go ahead and look at some things being. I wish I planned this out a little bit more, but that's the case, isn't it? So the first thing I want to do is just throw a public method in here and see what that gets me. So let's go to methods. We're not going to do that anymore. So we're going to do test methods ref. Okay. So first we're going to do public static, and there's probably some more things. Yeah, I don't know if I'm ready to write this thing yet. On stream anyway. Oh well, we'll just resume here when we get there. Next week. Static, not static. Virtual, public virtual, void. I'll just call this on. Oh, no. On PLAYER. Join. So let's go to Unity with that. What was that? What's that gonna get me? Events. Player manager. On player join. So we can do that. It's also got things where I can do strings. So this guy I could pass. Player imp. All right, player input manager. Events. Input system is event driven. Delta state event and a state event. So Unity input manager. All right, Unity. Player input manager. It auto corrected for some reason, not to my benefit. It's player input. Behavior invoke C. All right, need to invoke. And we're looking and we're reading on player joined. plus equal, yeah, so we can reference this guy. Okay, so we could reference player joined, player input. Targets.add. Player input on player joined, we can grab the player input. Okay, so let's get, but I could really care less about the input, right? What I would want is that top layer transform or some object or some reference that I put on that top layer object. So let's say I can put any type of thing in there. So that's confirmed. As long as it's public, I can put anything I want in there. So that's good. I just need to know what that is. That's player input. So we should get the player input. Probably want to get the component top, or you can put a script on the player input level, which is probably what we want to do. Okay. So what if we do this? Come on. Think clearly. We want this one on player join. It's gonna be a player AY player a player input. Did it add it to the using? Yep. Automatically added, but if it doesn't, just add a line using input system. And then we're gonna go a player input. And then we go player API dot game object dot get component. And now we're free to do whatever we want, because now essentially what we got is we have all the information we need to drill down from this object that we're instantiating to the point where we get to here, because player bod is where this survives. So we can get any of these components if we want to talk to them. So I might make like a player info mono behavior and just put it on here rather than incorporating it with something else. The reason for that being is that all it's really going to do is keep track of its player number. The player info is probably going to be the customization info, which is what will change all the colors for the UI for all that stuff. If we can just save to the player info that way, it would be a lot better than trying to do a bunch of separate systems, save out that way. And then the UI can just simply write to this object, find it and write to this object for player info through the player managers or the player manager. So for right now, and this is probably going to be a longer test to do some stuff. We are going to go player manager is going to have the dictionary of player input or you know what, let's get the transform. Because regardless, then we can always flip back through the correct transform. Transform. Because transform, we can always get other components too. So if we wanted to have like a color thing where it's like, okay, so all of this information goes to player manager or something that plugs into player manager who can go to the other guys and say, hey, guys with this info, change to this thing, because that's what our other thing has been saved to. You know, it works pretty good. I'm actually thinking of making a mini shop for player customization because it's going to be like if anyone's played Custom Robo, it'll work that way. Because I can also have the screen UIs to just go over top of the different cameras. So if I have like here and then I'm like, I can just put each one on like a quarter of a screen and people can customize their bikes rather than this swiping thing I was working on. Which isn't any different. It's as far as that mechanic, it's just at once. It might be easier with this input system to do it that way. Protective virtual void on enable single racer. So this guy, I'm just gonna get his game objects, which is the best thing to do. And actually it's dot transform, and then we need to assign it to what we just made. So it's an int. So protected PLAY player IDX. And then if we have player IDX, we want to declare it as a 1 because referencing back and forth, I'd rather just have 1 through 4, player 1 through 4, rather than zeros and stuff like that. It'll make it easier in the long run for me if I just do that for the player keys. Sometimes it's better to just index them, and then it's an integer. So on player join, it's dictionary, so players dot add the key value pair of this, add the player index, player IDX, comma, that transform. So then the transform sends it all the way back into this dictionary. So we're storing that information and keeping track of that. So we'll know which player is which when we go to speak to it via the transform. Transform being the one that the object is on. And let's just go ahead and test. Well, before that, we need to do player. Can't type. Control C, Control V. Oh. That, and then debug.log the this dot as game object dot name. So let's try that, see what our information is. Yeah, this is more like a troubleshooting session than a dev session, but you gotta find out what's going on sometime. So if I go back to this manager, events, player manager, on player join, let's play. I want to look at the console. Player bod, which is what the input's on. So we have access to this object. So from here we can set up our whole thing for whatever viewports, viewports and other things we want. So one thing would be I'll probably adjust the viewport because this is after it's joined, which means it's also run all the other stuff, the screen, split screen, or at least we'll try. But on top of that, it's going to be perfect. Well, there are 2 audio listeners in the scene. Okay, so probably need to go through and maybe delete the audio listeners on the camera objects in the scene and create a different audio listener. Yeah, delete them in the prefab and then add audio listeners to the scene, or one audio listener, just so it doesn't freak out too much, because we kind of just want it to play flat and don't want to like doubled up noises and stuff. That's probably a different day. But we're looking pretty good on that. I wasn't thinking that we were gonna go on to such a tangent with that, and also I didn't look this up beforehand. So no, no graph view, no experimental crap in this program. But yeah, so that's on player join. So we should get 3 players in there, which is great. And then we can limit the number of players, which I'll probably limit mine to 4. But we can do all of that. And this is looking pretty good. Then we can also make like a color changer, player color changer, set up that sort of thing, as well as change your viewports, so that we're not actually using that one, because that would be so cool to have it top split screen and bottom split screen, not side by side left and right. Which is just adjusting the camera viewport and the camera placement. So I think that's gonna do it. I think. Good. So this is all the way up, and then on player join. I'm not gonna do on player remove, because, well, I guess I should, because if you lose connection to the player, it'll drop them, right? That would be more. Players aren't gonna drop mid-race session. What you would have to actually do is like close it anyway, because then they're gonna have the standing in the race and they can't join the one afterwards or after the first one starts. So it'd probably be better just to leave that alone. But we'll look at debug.log. So this works good. and 33 minutes. I think I'm actually going to call it here a little bit. We've talked a lot about the different things. Um, I had to do some different things that made it a little bit harder because I had to pass more references, but I think your guys' demo should work just fine with this so far. Whoops. Oh, good. Just duplicated the comment. It's fine. Whew. Scary. So this should all be good. This should look great. Public Racer, remove P. And then we should be ready to just start doing colors and setting stuff up for that. That'll probably take more than 30 minutes, so I think I am going to be done for tonight. Just call it early. So let's look at the so as always, remember that if you like these or you find them useful, live demos are on Twitch TV at jib _at _BFB, and recordings are logged at youtube.com, Bugfree Productions. If you have a question or if you have idea or a topic you're struggling with, go ahead and post on there. I'll at least know a channel to point you to, if not the actual answer. So let me know. Also remember to like, subscribe, and share the videos from the YouTube channel. It would help out a lot. And with that, I think we're gonna close up. As always, have a bug-free night, and we'll play this out. Here we